Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Let me wait a moment for all of our attendees to come in on Zoom. And thank you so much for, I guess if you were here yesterday, joining us again, or if you weren't here yesterday, for joining us for the first time. Today's going to be part 2 of our So You Have 5 Acres workshop. And like I mentioned yesterday, part of the reason why we're doing this is because we get so many questions from people who are new to Florida. They've bought some property, they have 1 acre, 5 acres, 10 acres, and they're wondering what they can do with it. So we're giving a couple ideas in this workshop about how you can raise livestock to help feed your family, potentially turn into a small side business. But there's a lot of things that you need to keep in mind and know up front before you make that big decision whether to go all in and invest your life savings or even just a little bit of money and start getting animals. So we're going to cover all that today, and it looks like everybody has come in from Zoom. Hopefully this is working on Facebook also. So we'll check that in a moment, but let me go ahead and introduce Laura Bennett. Laura was here yesterday speaking all about poultry, and today's Laura is going to cover goats, beef cattle, and she said a little bit about sheep. So a little bit of everything. Once again, in the Zoom room here, we have disabled chat, but if you look at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, you can click on Q&A and type in your question. You can type in your question and go ahead and start early, but we're going to wait until the very end to go through and answer all the questions through Zoom. And I can also see on my other screen over here, Facebook. So if you're watching us live on Facebook and you have a question, go ahead and type that in the comments and we'll get to all of them at the very end. So Laura, let me go ahead and turn it over to you and you can screen share and take it from there.
Okay, thank you. And I will get my screen up here. And my computer is going to be slow. Okay, from beginning. Okay, yay. So Bill, can you see everything well?
Yeah, I see everything just fine. You're working.
Okay, great. All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. And today, my goal is to share with you some information about our ruminant livestock, and that's going to be cattle, goats, and sheep. And a lot of the time, most people are looking at cattle and goats because they're kind of comparable in the fact that you can go the meat route or you can go the dairy route. And so I've kind of spent a little more emphasis on them, but all three are comparable. So we're going to put them all together today. And I just want to explain too that this is going to be somewhat of a 10,000 foot view of livestock production with ruminants. Several of these topics we could spend hours on. And as you're listening today, if something in particular stands out to you, at the end of the presentation, grab my email address and the phone number there, and you are welcome to contact me and I can get some more information for you, because it's going to be a learning process and there's a lot to know. So try not to be overwhelmed. So my always beginning statement I try to make with people: before you go any further, please be sure you are zoned appropriately for livestock ownership. One of the worst things that you can have happen is, after the fact, find out that you now have to find new homes for them, because you don't want to be in trouble with code enforcement, and you want to make sure that everything is good to go. So don't stick your head in the sand or maybe head in the bucket to avoid something that might be coming down the road. So always do that first. So the ruminant is a very unique animal, and they're called ruminants because they have a large compartment called the rumen. And this compartment allows them to eat lower grade foodstuffs that we can't utilize. And so In that compartment, there are many microbes. There's over 2,500 different microbes that live in that compartment. It's a fermentation vat that is a symbiotic relationship. The animals provide the perfect housing for the microbes. There's bacteria, protozoa, and some fungi. It's a perfect environment for them to live. The animal provides them with food, provides them the right temperature, right amount of moisture, and it works out. And what happens is that animal is essentially feeding those bacteria, and those bacteria are opening up forage for them to be able to get the most out of that feed stuff. So this is a picture that I found a while ago that shows a piece of fiber being opened up and attacked by those bacteria. And so by opening that up, the bacteria feed themselves, they reproduce, they also give added nutrients for that animal, the ruminant, to use. And there's, as I said, there's over 2,500 different species, and I think to date scientists have only studied fully about less than 24 of these species. And so it's a fascinating area of work for improvement for nutrition for animals. The microbes themselves will actually pass to the true stomach and are digested. And those microbes, their bodies are approximately 55% protein. So it's a protein source for the animals as well. So basically the path is the animal will consume grass or hay or feed for that matter, passes through the esophagus. It will go into that largest compartment, the rumen, and it will mix and mix around. Later on, larger particles will sift back toward the reticulum area, and those larger particles, when the ruminant is resting later, will be regurgitated, and they will and I say chew because they don't have 2 rows of teeth, they only have 1 row of teeth. They will grind up their food, and that fiber will then pass back. They'll swallow it, it will go back to the rumen, and what has happened is that exposes more surface area on that fiber for the bacteria to work on it again. And so once all that churning goes on, the small particles and fluid will pass to the other compartments of the stomach and will be digested eventually with enzymes like we have in our stomach. So the idea, especially when you're on pasture, is to keep the right microbes proliferating. So we want the forage digesters to be the most abundant in that rumen. So plenty of forage helps with that. You want to provide some crude protein to the animal, which will then kind of feed the bacteria in the rumen. And we also don't want to make drastic diet changes because, for example, if you go out there and if you all of a sudden they've been having only grass and you dumped them a whole bag of corn, that rumen environment is going to change very rapidly. Certain bacteria are going to proliferate, and then those bacteria will change the pH and it will kill off your forage digesters. And you don't want to have drastic diet changes for them. Slow and steady wins the race with any changes you make to their diet. So we want to keep that rumen as balanced as we can. And so it's always a matter of just slight changes if you do start supplementing them. So Bahia grass is going to be our base because Bahia grass is what you're going to find most in pastures to begin with. And also Bahia grass is also very sturdy. It can handle grazing, heavy grazing. It can handle drought. It can handle water. So it's just a very wide range, broad forage that's useful to us in livestock. So what's interesting about cattle, sheep, and goat is they have different grazing behaviors. Cattle and sheep are grazers, and that means they prefer grass, and they put their head down and they go. Goats, on the other hand, are more shifted toward the browser category, and they do graze, but they do browse. And what that means is they will eat things that are growing up a little bit higher. So for example, they will actually pick leaves off of briars. They'll eat leaves off of other types of weeds that maybe cattle would avoid. So they have a different preference, and you can also play on that preference as well. There are some grass seed mixes, or well, actually grass and legume mixes that you can plant for goats that will provide them some of those taller, more erect forages for them to graze. And sometimes it includes clover, some peas, and you may even find some grasses in the mix that may not grow so well in Florida because we're so hot, but those seeds just won't grow and proliferate. So if you buy a mix, don't be disappointed if everything does not come up. So the next question is always the famous one, is what is my stocking rate? And your stocking rate at your home could be different from the person across the street, and it's for very many reasons. So in general, the literature says 6 mature goats equals 1 mature cow, and that's based on their consumption and what and how they eat. So that's generally the rule of thumb. So your stocking rate at your particular place is going to depend on what kind of forage you actually have present there, the amount of trees you have. Trees are an enemy of grass growth. Grass does not like shade. Now you have to have shade for the animal's sake, but too many, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. The dryness of your property. If you're on a hill where it dries out very quickly, your grass is liable to be pretty sparse, and you're not going to be able to hold as many animals there. Are you going to rotationally graze? And we're going to talk about that several times during the program, because rotational grazing can really bump up the number of animals that you can hold on your property. And we'll explain that in a bit. How much are you willing to feed? Are you willing to feed a lot of hay during the winter and the drought months? Or are you going to say, nope, I want to keep it as low key, low expense as I can? Then you want your stocking rate to be lower, because you won't be able to tolerate too much feed. And then also your soil type. Certain soils grow grass much better than others. And so and you may not be able to tell what your stocking rate is until you've had several seasons of experience with what's at your place. And that's my general recommendation, is always start out with fewer animals than you think you need, and you can always add later, because most people will not get rid of if they need to. So always start smaller than you think, and then you can always add. All right, another concept you need to keep in mind is you cannot own only one animal. Cattle, goats, and sheep are very social creatures, and it's really based on that herd instinct that is in them. They feel safe with other animals, and if they're by themselves, they don't feel comfortable, and they always somewhat feel threatened. So it's always best to have more than one, and try not to have only one, or isolate one if you ever can help it. Okay, so forage diet is going to be your base. So we have the ability to provide them a better diet than maybe even what's available in the pasture if we provide them enough forage to select from. So you always want to keep that grass height up so they can choose from the better, more nutritious heights that are out in your pasture. Hay supplementation is likely going to be necessary during your cold months, but if you prefer not to feed hay and you're in a place where you can get some moisture, there's always that option of planting some winter annuals like ryegrass, and that can overcome some of those slack times in the year. So you need to keep in mind that you need to become a grass farmer to own large and small ruminants. Soil fertility is going to be important, and we have soil tests kits and instructions that you can get from our extension offices that you can send to the University of Florida and find out recommendations for fertilization or even lime application. And really, if all you do is make sure your pH is good, you don't necessarily have to fertilize, because Bahia grass is very hardy, especially if the pH is where it needs to be. But they will give you some sound recommendations about what you may want to consider. Weed management is going to be also yet another priority that you'll have. And this can be done one of two ways, either mechanical or chemical. So mechanical management would be mowing or bush hogging above the height of your grass to reduce the height of your weeds. And this will prevent weeds from shading your Bahia grass and allows your grass to be more competitive. Now, if you want to get rid of the weeds, really get rid of them, or let me say, not totally get rid of them, just control them better, there are some herbicides rated for grazing purposes that have no withdrawal time. And those are some ideas that you might want to consider to keep some control and not let the grass get too far behind weeds. But there are recommendations for that as well. And rotational grazing is another way to improve your grass. If you can keep the height of that grass between 4 inches and 8 inches, that's going to be best. At least 3 to 4 to keep photosynthesis at its height, and lower than 8 to keep the quality at its optimum. Because as grass gets taller, it becomes less digestible and has less protein in it. So we want to keep it at that optimum height for nutrition for the animal as well. So our Florida forage quality is not that great. The people from up north have much better soil, so their grass is much better, and they have more grasses to choose from that are just have much more quality. Our warm season grasses combined with our poor soil create some marginal forage. Our forage is best in the spring and early summer, and that's when it's going to have its highest quality, meaning protein and total digestible nutrients. Late summer and winter, it becomes much poorer quality, and that's when you're going to have a supplementation program that's going to provide that at least extra protein and perhaps extra TDN or calories, because we just can't cover them year round unless you plant a cover crop, but that's an option. All right, all livestock need to have mineral supplementation, and this needs to be provided year round, free choice, and in a loose mineral form. Calcium and phosphorus are two of the biggest ones that they need, but also for our Florida soils, we need selenium and a multitude of others. Selenium is really important for reproduction and young calf, kid, young baby, I'm drawing a blank. And sheep as well. But sheep cannot tolerate copper at the levels that cattle and goats need. So always read your labels, because copper can be quite toxic to sheep at the right amounts. So don't feed a complete cattle feed to sheep. You always want to make sure you're watching for that and make sure your mineral is appropriate for your sheep as well. All right, so you've got your pasture going, and inevitably you're going to find weeds out there that you're going to be suspicious of. So this is part of the poisonous weed pasture poster that I have available at my office, and I have quite a few, and I can actually bring some more to Hernando as well. I also have this poster on a PDF, and if you would like to have the PDF sent to you, please, at the end of the presentation, jot my email down, send me a note, please send me the poster, and I can send it to you. But it's really a nice poster because it's not shown here, but on the bottom, it also shows which herbicides work best on which weeds. And so I find this a very handy reference material. And while we're talking about weeds, if you ever find a weed that's suspicious in your pasture, take several pictures and send it. You can email them to me, and I can diagnose most of them. And if I can't, I can send them off to the university for specific identification. But that's always a tool that's easy to do, and you're welcome to send me pictures as well. And if I can't ID it, I'll find somebody that can. All right. So you got your pasture going, and the next thing you need to do is make sure you're prepared with facilities. So your fencing is going to be one of your biggest expenses, and you need to decide, are you going to put up electric fence? Is it going to be barbed wire, board, field fence? Now with goats, you definitely need some sturdy field fence because they like to climb. And so and also you want to protect them from predators, because that can be difficult. So fencing, you get that right, and thinking about handling, because you need to have at least bare minimum some pens to put the animals in should you need to restrain, put them in there to get the vet to come or something like that. So don't get the animals before you're prepared for that. And now, if you see on the bottom left the cows in the squeeze chute, you're going to need that to administer medications, vaccines, dewormer, parasite control. And so you don't have to purchase a squeeze chute necessarily, especially on your small operation. But we're going to talk about, there are some, you can hire some day workers that have portable facilities that they can bring to you. Now, of course, it's costly, but it might be cheaper for you than having this huge equipment cost out front that you just really don't want to take on right now. In the upper right corner, this is a sheep table or a goat table, but these are very handy, and it's not necessary for hoof trimming, but it does make hoof trimming easier. So the animals walk in, and it's hard to tell, I'm not a good picture taker, but they flip the table over, and then he's trimming that the sheep's feet, because sheep and goats need to have their hooves trimmed on a rather regular basis, and you can't afford not to, because it can cause problems in their feet and lameness if you're not careful. Also, too, at your place, you need to have some shade. It's so hot here in the summertime, and those animals need some relief. So if you don't have a few trees or somewhere for them to get, you're going to need to provide some kind of structure or shade structure for them to be able to escape some of that sun. So as I mentioned before, there are people around that you can hire for day work. We call them day workers, or you can call them cowboys, but some have portable pens they can bring, some have portable squeeze chutes that they can bring. And of course, there's going to be some cost for them going that extra mile, but you need to decide if you want to weigh out the cost of owning, or in this case, possibly leasing the equipment for them to bring, because you need to be prepared for these things, because if you have an animal that is sick, or you need to give them their vaccine treatments, you need to be able to prepare and have those things ready. Goats are going to need a little bit of added, and I say shelter, because they are more prone to predators, whether it be just dogs that are running in the neighborhood. Dogs are attracted to goats and sheep, and you're going to have to just be very sure that you're secure with that. Maybe even at night, that's when some things tend to sneak in, so maybe you put them in a secure stall at night. Also, goats are very in need of, I'm going to say, entertainment. As you can see in the upper right picture, they love to climb on things, and they're going to climb on your fence, so make sure that fence is going to be something somewhat sturdy, and they are characters, so you just need to be prepared for that as well. Okay, so we've got our forage going, we have our facilities, and now we need to look at breed selection. So we're going to try to do a couple at the same time. It's going to be interesting, but both goats and cattle have a beef genetics, and then we have dairy genetics. And so in this picture, I have pictures of 2 different beef breeds that you can choose from. And you're going to need to do your research about what your preference is going to be. Now, within those breeds, you're going to find more heat tolerance in some of the animals. So on the left here, I have this picture of a Angus bull, and Angus cattle are not known for being heat tolerant. But this particular bull, if you notice, he's very short-haired. So he's probably been acclimated to Florida weather, because he really does not have excess hair like some would up north. So there's heat tolerance within breeds, but there's also heat tolerance between breeds. So on the right-hand side here, you see the white cattle here are Brahma cattle, and they are very heat tolerant and are made for our heat and hot climate in Florida. So on top of being heat tolerant, they also are very insect tolerant. Their hide is thicker, and they are not bothered nearly as much by mosquitoes and biting flies as would the Bos Taurus or the Angus breeds. So on that other note as well, temperament is going to be very important for you if you have small properties, because there's nothing worse than having cattle that are crazy. And there are ill-tempered cattle in all breeds, and certain breeds are known for having better temperament than others. But what you want to do if you're purchasing animals, you really want to stress to whomever you're purchasing from, you want good temperament, because it will make your life a whole lot easier. Now, the dairy animals, and I've got a dairy cow and dairy goats here, they are going to have a higher plane of nutrition. That their milk production is going to necessitate they have more calories, because it is very they are very productive, and they need the extra calories and nutrition. So dairy animals are not meaty by nature, and what I mean by that is they're not going to look like the bodybuilders that the beef cattle or meat goats are going to look like. They're going to have a thinner appearance. They're not going to be heavy muscled, because their genetics have just geared them towards milk production. So they are even body condition scored differently than our beef animals. So that is just something you need to keep in mind, that they just look different. Healthcare, you're going to want to design a healthcare program. There's going to be certain vaccines. You're going to need dewormer protocols, parasite control, internal and external for that matter, and illness that's going to pop up. And my first suggestion to you is have a relationship with a large animal veterinarian. Even if you just go sit with them and say, write me out your suggested protocol, whatever it might be, have them come visit one time and just have them come. Because in the middle of the night, when you have an emergency with one of your animals, you're much more apt to get your phone answered if it's with your veterinarian you already have an established relationship with. And you're going to need that veterinarian for certain things. Perhaps you want to try artificial insemination. There's things that you're going to need your veterinarian for, and you just need to make sure you have someone you can, call on when you need it. All right, some extra details about health that you need to keep in mind. The USDA and the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services have a goat and sheep Scrapey program. And this is a disease of the nervous system that it can be very delayed in showing symptoms. And so what they have for now is they register your herd for free, and they even provide identification tags for their ears. And what this does is, if you sell one of your animals on down the road and there's a problem, they can track it back and figure out all the places they've been, but also two, they just want to protect all the herds from having any issues. And we don't have a problem with this right now because we've been using this program for so long. So that's something that you would want to look into, and you can go straight to the FDAC's website and find out more information about that. And we do have FDAC's Animal Division personnel in Hernando County that we can call on if we should have any questions or need help. Now for cattle, they are required to have certain identification by the Florida Department of Agriculture. And this traceability program is also one in which if we had some sickness that broke out that we need to really trace back where everybody's been, that prevents us from shutting down the entire trade for our food system. So right now, and the rules are being changed some, but they haven't changed yet. But the rule right now is if you have an animal over 18 months of age, when it enters trade, it has to have an identification tag. And this is all things that are overseen by Florida Department of Agriculture, and it's all meant to be a safety net for raising cattle and for our food system. All right, cattle, I would say more so than goats and sheep, but they can as well have, fly control is going to be important. You can do this by different ways. You can put in an ear tag with a systemic in it that slowly releases, kind of similar to like the idea behind putting a topical on your dog or cat. But we also have porons that are very similar. If you understand that concept, it stays in their system for so long, and it helps with the control. Now, our entomologists at UF say that the best thing to use are dust bags. Now, on big ranches, they can't do this because the animals are just spread out all over the place and they would never go through here. But if you have small acreage, you can implement these kind of practices. And the idea is you put a dust in it every time, and you put it in a kind of an area where they have to go through every day. So for example, if you can see to the left here, there's the water trough. So the animals are going to go drink several times a day. Each time they go in, it's going to put a little bit of dust on them, and it's going to repel the flies. And they said that is the most effective way to keep flies off of your animals. And I'll share with you a picture. This is a producer actually in Hernando County that I told her, I said, maybe you should try this. And she put one up. She did this one weekend, and she's got her water trough back here. And the cows, now, if they want their water, which they will, they're going to walk under that bag, and it takes them a little bit getting adjusted to it, but they'll go. And I'm hoping to get some feedback from her to see how well it's worked. So I'm hoping that she has some success. So some other things to look out for, cattle do get lice in their tails upon occasion, but some of those systemic insecticides will take care of that as well. And you can get some permethrins and put them on their tail and get rid of that. The intestinal parasites, there's different ways to treat for those. You can put a poron down their back, and it's absorbed through the skin, and it'll go through their system and take care of those parasites. There are some that you can inject, and those go right under the skin, and it will stay in their system as well. And then there are drenches that you can also give them. And a drench would be used for there's a drench that you can use to get rid of the liver flukes, but there's also an injectable for that one as well. Goat health, and sheep for that matter, intestinal parasites are a huge problem for the small ruminants. And it's because a lot of these intestinal parasites have developed resistance to all the products that we have that are labeled for intestinal parasite control. So the goat and sheep, and I'm going to talk to you a minute about their procedure, getting rid of some of these, have gotten kind of a new take on how to handle it, and they're battling them in a different way. So I'll show that to you here shortly. But I like this diagram because this whole concept of this diagram applies to cattle as well. So if you study the life cycle of intestinal parasites, the adult worms live in their digestive system, and really, if you think about it this way, they're either blood suckers or they're fighting for the nutrition and you can look at it two ways, or just merely fighting for the nutrition that that animal is taking in. And so it's going to lower the overall nutritional status of your animal. So that's why they are such a pest. So that adult intestinal parasites in the digestive tract, it will pass eggs that will go out by way of the feces, and they will develop in the feces. Okay, it takes about 6 days for that larva to develop from those eggs that are deposited. That larva is going to scooch up the blades of grass. Now this diagram says they go 2 to 3 inches. I've seen some literature that says they may go at the max 6. So let's say it's 2 to 3 inches. If you think about that, what's going to be one of your best battles for keeping your intestinal parasites at bay? It's going to be watching your grass height. If you can keep it pushed up to that 4-inch level, you're not going to eliminate parasites, but you're going to greatly cut back on how many of them get ingested by the animals. And so if we can kind of manage our pasture so that we're not getting too low on the grass, you can overcome there. And another idea too is if you're rotationally grazing and it takes 6 days for these eggs to develop into larvae, that tells you, let me rotate my pastures every 5 days and keep them off of there for a week or two. It's not going to eliminate your intestinal parasite problem, but with rotational grazing, you can cut back on the problem. It's very intense. It's an intensive way of management. It's not as easy as just giving them something, but it can, especially with goats and sheep, it's such a battle. That's one consideration that they can consider putting in their toolbox to get rid of them. The barber pole worm is one of the most serious problems that the goat and sheep have, and this one is one that we're particularly concerned of because it does deplete the body of the blood, and they can become anemic quite quickly. So the battle that the small ruminant people are using to battle this is Famosa, and this is a technique where you're going to peel the eyelid down and look to see the coloration, and if they're becoming anemic, that eyelid color is going to become more and more pale and faint. And so if you're in the upper end of good coloration, don't deworm. The animal's handling it, there's not a problem, okay? There may be parasites there, but the animal is not being overcome by it. Once you hit certain levels of pale, that pale color, you're going to be recommended to deworm, okay? So Famosa, I think there are some trainings online. Of course, in-person training is better, and those cards are very, very specific. So this is something that you might want to consider if you're going to have small ruminants, because it will really help you. The less you can deworm them, the more effective your dewormer will be when you need to have it. And so that's very important for our small ruminant people. Now, I was at a in-service training recently, and this was actually for a horse dewormer, but this dewormer, I won't say dewormer, it's a supplement that's available also for small ruminants that's coming out. It's recent. It's actually a fungus that has been, it's a biotech product you can mix into feed, and what happens is that fungus will get in the animal's digestive tract, and it's going to bind and capture the parasite larva. And it sounds like it's going to show some promise, especially for our small ruminant people. So this is from Dr. Donata. She provided this picture, but if you can see this long, it's a kind of I don't know if it's not really cigar shape. That's a parasite larva, and the fungus is wrapping around it. And what happens is that fungus will actually stop that parasite from completing its life cycle. And this would be so nice if we find out that this is really going to help especially the small ruminant people. I have not seen any more research on this, but it's something to be on the lookout for. All right, vaccinations. There are several, and I just put respiratory and reproductive into a category. Tetanus is one that's very helpful to have. The clostridial diseases, there are clostridial diseases in cattle, and there are some in goats and sheep. Now, in goats and sheep, the clostridial C, D, and tetanus are extremely important to be sure you get them vaccinated for. And because there's a condition called enterotoxemia, and it's also called overeating disease, but young animals and also heavy lactating animals need to make sure they're up to date on that CDT vaccine. So this is we could spend 2 hours talking about vaccination protocols for animals, but this is something you just want to put on your mind to do some more research about. All right, reproduction. Needless to say, if you want to have calves or you want to have kids, you're going to have reproduction take place. Now, you're also going to have reproduction in order to put that goat or cow into production. So that means you have to have a male. And on small pieces of property, bulls for sure, but and to some extent, bucks are a pain to have around. So you're going to have to decide how you're going to either put up with that or overcome it. Now, artificial insemination, not as prevalent. I know sheep, it's not very prevalent, but goats, it's available, but it's also available in cattle. So you might want to consider doing that. And some large animal veterinarians will do that, but you may have to find someone who is actually using artificial insemination and hire them to come do it. That's an option to get around having those males on your property. Another consideration is to find out if you're eligible for ag exemption on your property taxes. Now, every county is different and their policies also always change. So you'll have to do the research on that. You're going to go through the property appraiser's office, and you might even specifically ask if they have an agricultural department. And certain counties require you to have a certain amount of acreage. I know way back, a lot of counties, you had to have at least 10 acres, and that could have changed. But you'll want to look into that because that can be helpful to you as well. But like I said, you will have to do that research and get that ball rolling. I highly encourage you to join one of the associations that could be affiliated with what you choose to raise. There's a Florida Cattlemen's Association, and Hernando County also has a local county cattlemen's association. And it'll provide you ways to network and learn more about what's going on, especially with your industry. Now, there's a Florida Dairy Goat Association, and there's a Florida Meat Sheep Alliance, and all of these, and you might look on Facebook for groups as well. But for example, the Florida Meat Sheep Alliance, they met I can't remember, I think it was last fall. I went to their field day, and it was actually right here in Brooksville. And they actually, as part of their field day, they had a Famosa training. So it's really going to be good for you to get in with some of these groups, join them. They have educational opportunities, and also it's a way for you to find out who are some people they all have membership lists that you can find for purchasing animals from as well. And that's finding people that are growing these animals and dealing with the day in and day out experiences is going to be invaluable, because they can give you even more specific information than probably I can, because I've never raised goats, but I do know most of the application for them. But people that are raising them can really help out a lot. So then when it comes to making a decision, the small ruminants and the cattle, they're rather sturdy animals. They don't require attention every moment of the day. So those are some things that are nice. Grass is their primary food source, and grass, can be cheap if you stock your place correctly. The cons are going to be predators for your goats and sheep. That's going to be something you're going to have to really consider a lot of extra care there. The pens and equipment needed for all of them can get kind of expensive. Fencing costs are going to be expensive as well, unless you already have fence, of course. And handling can be difficult, particularly with cattle, trying to get certain things done. And then the animal costs themselves can be high. And it all depends on what kind of animal you're getting, and is it purebred, is it crossbred, size. All these things are going to play into the animal cost. And you're just going to have to do some research there as well to figure out what you're going to tolerate. So
you would like a copy of
my narration is going
sent to you electronically, please call our Pasco Extension office.
Okay, I'm going to turn this off. All right, I had a recording on this one for some reason. I copied from somewhere else, but here is my email address and also our main office number over here. And of course you can call the Hernando County office if you want, and they can get you in touch with me. But if there's anything in particular that you would like more information on, please feel free to contact me, and I will do my best to research it, get it to you. I may already have the information, but especially the poisonous weed guide. And I also have another paper that's that our weed specialist puts out, I find very useful, is the weed management guide, and it'll go through even any kind of pasture weed and tell you what's the most effective herbicide to use on them and how to go about doing that. I also have documents on planting grass, winter forages. Truly just ask me, and if I say I don't know, I will say give me a few days and I'll look for it. But hopefully I can help you making your decision. So Bill, I guess I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. That was really great. We do have just a few questions on here, but I want to mention to everybody first, before I forget, that for everybody who watched this and participated through Zoom, in about a month or so, as soon as we get to it, basically, we're going to be sending everybody a very brief survey. You'll be getting that in your email, so we ask that when you get that email, take just a few minutes and fill that survey out and get it back to us. For those who are watching us on Facebook, we're going to try something a little bit new and getting some survey information to you guys also through Facebook. So if you see something in your feed, your Facebook feed, referring to this series of classes, please just take a few minutes and fill out our brief survey. That really helps us with knowing if what we're doing is having some kind of impact, gives us ideas for what more we can do and offer to our community and the residents that are going to help them out, because we're here for you guys. For both of us, one of our programs is to help improve people's food systems, and especially with COVID-19 and all the other problems, there's a lot of interest in being more sustainable and self-sufficient, and we are more than happy to help in any way that we can. Let me go ahead and go on to some questions here. So Richard asked, he needs some information about clearing his 5 acres of land that's full of trees. Richard, what you're going to have to do is contact companies. There are companies that do land clearing. We, with Extension, really don't recommend one company over another because we're a public agency. We don't want to be showing favorites to one land clearing service or another. My suggestion would be to contact several different companies and get prices, have them come out and give you a written quote. You may want to try contacting our Hernando County Forester. He is with the Florida Forest Service, so you can look online and find his name and phone number. If you need that, you can contact our office. We can go ahead and look him up and get his information to you. And also, for Laura, does your email need to be all in caps? I can answer that one. No, it's all lowercase. So if you get the letters and the dots correct, .ufl.edu, then you're good. So, oh, I see it is all in caps on the slide here.
I
No,
know, I don't,
lowercase is fine. It'll find its way through the internet. So Nadia asks, if a cow has access to 2 acres of bahia without any trees, plus 1 heavily treed acre for a total of 3 acres, will the cow eat tree leaves and other wild or indigenous foliage that grows as undergrowth under the tree canopy? The 1 treed acre is nearly 100% shade with 0 grass growing.
right. The cow likely will not eat anything that's under or around the tree, and because typically those loafing areas, we call them loafing areas under the tree, they grow woody weeds and weeds that they just do not like. And so you'll probably see that they will not fool with any of that. They're going to much more graze the grass. Now, you want to make sure that nothing that's growing there, if she's been in there, it's probably safe, but just make sure there's nothing popped up that could be poisonous, because there's one weed, the nightshade. It loves to grow in shady areas, and it also likes to grow in your fence line. And while it's poisonous, they typically won't eat it unless they have nothing else to eat. So the animals are pretty wise about those things, but you always want to, anytime you see something that could be potentially poisonous, just remove it. So just make sure that you don't have anything growing there that's suspect.
Okay, and Nancy asks, how much pasture land would you need for 2 to 3 cattle?
I would say I would always lean on the side, and it all depends. If it's hilly, if it's too dry, it's gonna change. But I always say at least start out with 3 or 4 acres per animal, and you can always add later. So I would try to get 10 acres for that many if I could. And you probably can add more, but you don't want to get in a situation if it does not grow grass well that you don't have enough for them.
Okay. And would you consider alpacas in the same category as sheep and goats?
I did not look into the alpacas because they're grazers as well. So I'm assuming that they must be, be honest with you, I'm assuming that they're ruminants. I would say they have to be. But see, like a horse we call that a pseudo, because horses have rear gut fermentation. So I'm not sure if the alpacas are forward, like the small ruminants and cattle, or rear gut fermenters. I don't know.
Well, maybe one day we can have a follow-up class all on alpacas.
Yeah, well, because I really don't know much about them.
Uh-huh. Oh, neither do I. You still know more than I do on the topic, so.
Mm-hmm.
And Nancy also on Zoom asked, can you keep a dairy and beef cow together?
Yes. That would be no problem.
Okay, and we have a question, well, we have a comment on Facebook Live. Chuck and Barbie Bowser say huge impact. So that's really great to hear that we are, being of a benefit and having an impact on our community. And Paul Ramos asks, what is the proper ratio of number of goats to acres? So how many goats per acre?
Well, yeah, and that's going to all depend on, the forage base you have and how well and prolific it's going to grow. So if we say, and go back to that statistic of 6 goats equal 1 cow, I would say, if you're going to provide 2 to 3 acres per cow, then that means 2 to 3 acres should hold about 18 goats, technically. So it's going to be a trial and error because every location is going to be so different.
Okay, we got a couple thank yous on Facebook Live here, which is great. And I don't see any other questions. So we'd like to thank everybody who joined in, whether through Zoom or through Facebook Live. Keep in mind, this presentation is being recorded, and we'll go ahead and put a link on our Facebook pages. Or If you're not on Facebook and you just like a link to the video after we get it up on YouTube, if you email Laura, she'll have a link for it also. We'll get that to you and you can watch it over and over. And we thank you very much for joining us. And if there's any other ideas that you'd like us to speak on, because you have 5 acres and you're thinking about what you could possibly do with it for extra money or extra food production, please feel free to share. I mean, we love to get suggestions and ideas. So Laura, anything else?
No, feel free to reach out to me